Hello, everyone. Welcome to Diplomatic Briefing. French President Macron's visit to China has come to an end. Although he received a warm welcome from local residents during his final stop in Chengdu, Kong Fan, a reporter from the French European Times, quoted French diplomatic and China affairs expert Lincot as saying in an exclusive interview with Le Figaro that, in his view, France's time has already passed as far as China is concerned. The article states that this visit by French President Macron to China not only does it carry symbolic significance in terms of diplomacy, but it also reveals France's deep anxiety within the current international political and economic landscape. This exclusive interview with Le Figaro approaches the issue from multiple angles, offering a candid analysis of France-China relations, the strategic situation in Europe, and the reshaping of the global power structure, making it well worth a deeper interpretation. First of all, this visit emphasized ceremony and symbolism more than substantive policy. Lincot got straight to the point by stating that Macron harbors no illusions about persuading China to make economic concessions. This statement itself illustrates that France's current influence is limited. On one hand, France hopes to gain returns in areas such as technology transfer and favorable contracts. But on the other hand, it lacks the ability to exert substantial influence in its relations with China. This sense of having the will but not the power has become an important footnote to the diplomatic reality of this visit. Next, regarding the current global landscape of technological competition, especially in key areas such as electric vehicles and artificial intelligence, China's rise as a technological powerhouse is now beyond doubt. Lincot acknowledged that China holds a dominant position in almost every field. The EU is attempting to respond as a whole, but due to internal differences and weak resource integration, it is difficult to form an effective joint force. In contrast, China relies on its strong industrial chain connectivity and rapid technological iteration. Why is Europe feeling a sense of defeat in the face of China's lead in emerging technology fields? This contrast is clearly evident in European academic circles. Kong Fan believes that it's worth noting that although Lincot pays considerable attention to China's rise, he is more focused on a sober self-reflection regarding Europe itself. He bluntly pointed out that as a single country, it is no longer possible to compete with Beijing, and he even used the term outdated nation to describe France's current marginalization in the great power rivalry. This frankness to some extent touches on the core issues facing Europe. The core issue of structural political decline in recent years also reflects an indirect acknowledgement of China's strategic resolve and sustained development capabilities. Lincot's interview honestly conveys the complex emotions that France and even Europe as a whole feel when facing the new reality of China: respect, helplessness, and awe, but also accompanied by anxiety. They are beginning to realize that China is no longer just the manufacturing factory of the past. China is now even a shaper of new rules, and they realize that when facing a country with such strong national will and strategic confidence, they can only strive for limited discourse power through ceremonial visits. In fact, France's attitude toward China to some extent reflects the general situation among Europeans. For example, British media have published articles focusing on the ironic contrast in Europe. While European politicians are sounding the alarm about decoupling from China, what about European businesses? They are accelerating their engagement with China with real money. The Financial Times published an article on December 2nd stating that although European politicians are concerned about industrial reliance on China and its trade deficit, European manufacturers are increasing investments in China to compete. This is true in industries like chemicals, automotive, machinery, and pharmaceuticals. Some treat China as an export base or R&D center. China's low costs, developed supply chains, and local government procurement policies attract them. Such requirements have made it increasingly difficult for European companies to compete with Chinese firms overseas, which in turn has accelerated their reliance on the Chinese domestic market. Some analysts are concerned that this will further strengthen China's position in the global industrial supply chain and may squeeze local employment and industrial competitiveness in Europe. European companies say that China's low costs and highly efficient supply chains are making it harder and harder for them to compete with their Chinese rivals, while government procurement rules also require companies to adapt. Only after submitting local reports can companies enter the Chinese market. Heinz, the CEO of Swiss chemical company Clariant, said that given the current situation of local competition in the Chinese market, bringing products into China is no longer competitive. Their company invested 180 million Swiss francs, which is about 1.6 billion RMB, to expand their factory in the Daya Bay petrochemical zone in Huizhou. Last year, German chemical giant BASF and energy giant Shell also operated in this area. They announced major investment plans. The president of the European Union Chamber of Commerce in China, Jens Hildebrandt, said that overall, European companies have not reduced their dependence on China. On the contrary, global companies as a whole are becoming increasingly dependent on China. According to a survey conducted by their chamber among member companies this year, about a quarter of the companies are moving more production lines to China, meaning that the proportion of companies localizing production in China is twice the number of companies shifting their industries to other countries. In the pharmaceutical machinery and medical equipment industries, the proportions are 80%, 46%, and 40% respectively. The chamber stated that China's increasing local content requirements for government procurement are driving this trend. Because international companies want to expand into the local market, data from consulting firm Rhodium Group shows that since 2021, EU manufacturing foreign direct investment, FDI, has continued to flow into China. In the second quarter of last year, the EU's greenfield investment in China reached a record high of 3.6 billion euros. Greenfield investment refers to companies directly entering the target country's market by building new factories, facilities, and branches. The main forms of this include wholly owned enterprises and joint ventures. The article points out that for Europe, what may be even more concerning is that many companies are shifting production to China in order to turn China into their export base. Since the outbreak of the Russia-Ukraine conflict in 2022, costs in areas like energy have soared in Europe, while China can serve as a production base with much lower costs than Europe. The chief representative of the Federation of German Industries in China, Perhag, recently. At a forum event, he said that China's efforts to expand domestic demand and allow the renminbi to appreciate more in line with market forces will both help reduce trade imbalances and promote the establishment of a more stable long-term economic relationship between China and Europe. Representatives from the European Chamber of Commerce currently believe that if a company with a global supply chain wants to maintain cost competitiveness, it will go to the place where it can obtain the most cost-effective components, and among many industries, that place is China. The booming Chinese market also highlights the decline in Europe itself. The article notes that European companies are currently facing a wave of layoffs, especially in the automotive industry. While German companies are laying off workers at home, they are making large-scale investments in China's electric vehicle sector. For example, the German auto parts supplier ZF recently announced that by 2030, it will lay off 7,600 employees in Europe. Just a year ago, the company had announced its latest round of expansion in Shenyang, China. The auto parts manufacturer Schaeffler Group once told Chinese media that they plan to double the scale of their business in China within 6 to 7 years. The company has already announced the closure of some of its European operations, with a total of 4,700 layoffs. Engineering groups like Schneider, Danish transmission system manufacturer Danfoss, wind turbine maker Vestas, as well as pharmaceutical companies including Swiss Roche and AstraZeneca, have all recently announced expansion or factory upgrade plans in China. In addition to shifting their industries to China, Western companies are also deepening their R&D efforts in the country. Regarding the fact that European companies are voting with their feet and moving to China, DGA Group partner and former president of the EU Chamber of Commerce in China, Jörg Wuttke, frankly admits that Europe itself must also bear part of the responsibility. What Europe must do, and most importantly, is to solve its own problems, deregulate, lower energy prices to boost competitiveness, and improve education levels, especially in the field of engineering. Wuttke said, "Can we really blame China for this?" He said that European car manufacturers are treating the Chinese electric vehicle market as a gym to prepare for the transition to electrification. Before the opening of last April's Beijing Auto Show, Volkswagen CEO Oliver Blume praised in his speech that nowhere else in the world has the automotive industry's transformation been as fast as in China. This market has already become their training ground. They have to work harder and faster in order to keep up. There are also concerns that thanks to lower costs, China could become the main base for European companies to export to third country markets in the future, which would further impact the European domestic automotive industry. The European Commission has already started to implement action plans to improve the EU's industrial environment and is even planning to require Chinese companies to invest locally in the EU before they can enter the European market. In addition, some have warned that if products from these factories flow back into Europe, it could trigger a political backlash in the domestic market. Noah Barkin, a partner at Rhodium Group, is concerned that if China's policies continue and impact Europe's economic growth and employment, Europe may soon see a reaction similar to that of the United States. Barkin's warning is not unfounded. Many EU countries are tightening investment and procurement rules for key infrastructure such as ports, railways, information technology, and energy, with a particular focus on those coming from China and other countries. Third country companies are being used as an excuse to guard against national security risks. This is a discriminatory barrier targeting Chinese firms. The US-China trade war has paused, with both sides finding a balance. Even the US couldn't force China to make concessions. If the EU wants to start a trade war with China, what leverage does the EU have to challenge China? EU politicians' rhetoric of de-risking from China and European companies leaving China is, I believe, not the case. The outcome that Commission President Ursula von der Leyen originally wanted